Coming up, we're joined live in our studio by Taoiseach Michéal Martin. You're welcome back. Now today, Ireland takes over the presidency of the European Union, and that means that for the next 6 months, this country will be at the centre of EU decision-making and in charge of complex negotiations that shape laws and policy for 450 million people. As head of government, Taoiseach Michéal Martin will play a central role in everything that happens here over the next 6 months. And the Taoiseach is with us now in our studio. Good morning, and you're very welcome to the programme.
Good morning, Justin.
Ireland takes over the presidency of the European Union at a time when there's a war at the edge of Europe, there's rising political instability, there are deep divisions over the European budget. There's a lot to manage. In 6 months' time, what do you want to be able to say that you achieved during Ireland's presidency of the EU?
Well, on a number of fronts, what we want to achieve on the economic and competitiveness front, there's real fears in Europe that Europe is falling behind the United States, China and others in terms of competing for jobs and ensuring a viable economic future for European citizens, including Irish citizens. And there's a fairly significant roadmap out there before us for the next 6 months in terms of a savings and investment union, for example, capital markets union in other terms, which would utilise savings across Europe to enable SMEs to tap into venture capital and to grow more European-based companies and to scale them up within Europe much more effectively than is the case at the moment. Commissioner Michael McGrath is developing a proposal, for example, for small to medium-sized companies to be able to establish on a pan-European basis from day one with a legal framework. That would be quite tangible and an exciting prospect for many small to medium-sized companies. We will endeavour to drive that proposal. There are further initiatives around an Industrial Accelerator Act. So there's a very significant number of measures on that jobs front, which matters to every citizen in Europe. In addition to that, then, there's the budget that we have to agree, and we would like to narrow what now appears to be irreconcilable differences between different member states in terms of some who want to spend more, some who want to spend less, quite a significant number who want to protect common agricultural policy, cohesion funding, and then new areas like competitiveness funding and research, additional money for research funding, which actually is the key to new products and new ideas of the future. So we want to close that gap and try and get the budget complete by the end of the year. That would be a mammoth task, but we're up for it working with the presidency.
It will be a mammoth task. It's a 7-year budget, and there's enormous pressure from a number of member states to spend more money on security and defence and less on agriculture. Is Ireland going to have to set aside national interests during this presidency and say that, yes, we're going to have to agree with some of that sometimes that some member states are going to get their way and that there'll be more money spent on defence and less on farming?
Well, this is part of the challenge. Actually, the majority of a number of states want to actually maintain the spending on common agricultural policy and increase it. that would be a reading of some of the more, particularly countries on the eastern side.
The proposal on the table at the moment is to cut cap funding by 20%.
But they're not going to cut that anymore, is what I'm saying. I mean, at the moment, we don't have enough to do what everybody wants. Some, yes, want a defence component to it because, again, those on the eastern flank feel they're defending Europe and against Russia in terms of the border there, and they have particular significant deficits that they're running up in order to enhance their defence capability to deal with the Russian threat.
Are you comfortable with that, though, as now taking over the presidency, that we're going to have to stand over a budget which might spend more on defence and less on agriculture?
But the budget won't be spending more on defence over agriculture.
No, but that there'll be more money spent on defence and less money spent on agriculture.
It depends on what eventually gets agreed. That's the part of the challenge here. There are other European member states who want to cut the Commission produced a draft budget. There are some member states who feel it's too high because it envisages a higher income. Others believe it's not high enough. And others want to do more on agriculture and on cohesion.
What do you want?
And others, well, I think we need to get real. I do think I don't believe we should cut the draft budget that the Commission has, but our role is to broker this with other member states, and we will do that because I think the needs of Europe for the future are such, particularly in terms of economy, in terms of decarbonisation, in terms of digitalisation, the AI revolution. Yeah. Europe needs to equip itself for that. So you can't get more with less. Notwithstanding value for money and so forth. So I think it's going to be very challenging, just as it was on the last occasion, and I was there for the last time when we did. There would be an issue, for example, Justin, does Europe borrow more? Now, Germany would be very strongly against that. The French would be very much in favour of doing something like we did with the Next Generation funding in the middle of COVID, which was a radical change.
And do you think that might be required?
Well, I think that's in the mix, but whether it will get agreement is a completely different question. The third pillar, by the way, will be enlargement as well. Just want to make that point.
Okay, and I will come to that. One of the other priority areas is around online safety. Will you be seeking to get agreement on an EU-wide ban on social media for teenagers? Yes,
in terms of protecting children across Europe, I think there's a real prospect of that now. The Commission will be bringing forward proposals. The Commissioner von der Leyen, President of the Commission, established an expert panel that will be reporting, and my understanding is in July, and that the Commission is moving on this, and we, as in our capacity as the Presidency, will also be driving that agenda, because there's quite a number of member states want to do this. The precise mechanisms that we use are obviously up for discussion, but I do see progress in protecting our children. Okay. And the more we do it on a pan-European basis, I think the more effective it would be.
Will it go further than just an age verification system? Because the experts have said that the real damage is being done by social media companies that are pushing harmful content towards teenagers. Is that going to be tackled? Will they be forced to turn off the algorithms that push harmful content at young people?
Yeah, it could very well. I mean, again, I don't want to preempt what the Commissioner is going to produce, but an expert panel has been established by President von der Leyen in response to calls from member states, including ourselves, and therefore it could encompass a broad range of measures, objective being to protect children, and algorithms are key to that.
Okay, and what do you
also content.
What do you say to to Johnny Ryan, for example, who's writing today that Ireland should recuse itself from discussions around this issue because Ireland has such a cosy relationship with tech companies?
I would reject that. I mean, I think that's not a logical, in my view, or real sort of proposition. Every member state has technology companies within their jurisdictions, not just Ireland.
But have you been lobbied by tech companies on this issue?
I mean, the tech companies make their case, but not in the context.
Yes.
Well, no. Well, I mean, people are entitled to make their case in society, Justin. I mean, that's normal. The interaction between industry and governments. But the government is very clear that we have an obligation to protect children. We already have significant legislation in place in terms of protecting people from online abuse and so on. But in addition to that, if you look at the fines from the Data Protection Commission, there is no evidence actually that Ireland is any softer in respect of violations of technology laws and so on than any other jurisdiction across Europe.
All right.
And that is that. If you look at the DPC's fines of companies over the last number of years, that I think illustrates that point.
President Zelensky of Ukraine flies into Ireland today. You have been a supporter, and the Irish government has been a supporter of Ukraine's proposed membership of the EU. But can Ukraine become an EU member while the country is still at war? Because that would bring the EU to the front line of war with Russia.
Well, first of all, it is making very significant progress in terms of reforms. The chapters have been opened, the clusters have been opened, which I think is significant. We want to open more. And our objective is to open as many as we possibly can during our presidency, both Ukraine and Moldova. The Ukrainian people have endured an enormous amount of trauma and suffering at the hands of the Russian aggression and the invasion of their country. And one of the issues that is uppermost in their mind is the prospect of European Union membership. Now, it will be challenging in terms of timelines and so on like that.
But can that happen while the war is still ongoing?
I mean, we don't want the war to continue, obviously.
I know that, but if the war does continue...
But it is happening. Like the process is underway while the war is happening.
But can membership of the European Union happen while that country is still at war?
In theory, it can, yes.
Which would be unprecedented, wouldn't it?
But obviously, it's going to take time to progress the application. And there are different... I mean, we're doing it on a merit-based approach, just as we're doing other applicants from the Western Balkans. And so others are coming forward with ideas around association or a graduated membership. We will facilitate those discussions, but fundamentally, we're focused on a merit-based approach, which has got to do with the reforms and achieving the objectives and obligations that membership brings with it. So the significant number of chapters our clusters have been open now. We can progress the negotiations, but we want the war to end. And increasingly, Europe is looking and disposed to being part of any negotiation outcome eventually in respect of ending the war in Ukraine, because it should end, because the number of people dying there is quite appalling and shocking. Do
you accept that Ireland's commitment to Ukraine has been damaged by the continued export of alumina from the refinery in Aughinish to Russia, which is possibly being used to make weapons of war against Ukraine?
I don't accept that our support has been damaged in that respect. I mean, Europe makes the proposals, the European Commission, in respect of sanctions. And we've been strong supporters of all sanction packages, up to 20 sanctions packages. One second.
But
it's illustrative of our strong support, plus our unequivocal support from day one in respect of Ukrainian accession to the European Union, and plus the very significant humanitarian assistance and supports we have given to Ukrainian people since the war began, and to Ukraine directly, and also we're part of the reconstruction agenda in respect of Ukraine, and would, if possible, help to play a peacekeeping role or a ceasefire monitoring role if called upon to do so, and within the appropriate frameworks at the moment.
Did you ask the European Commission not to sanction Aughinish Alumina?
No, I didn't personally ask.
Did the Irish government ask for that?
In terms of the Aughinish issue, alumina has not been a substance at European level that has been put on the sanctions list. The reason being that it's part of a wider European supply chain. Did the
Irish government ask the European Commission not to put Aughinish on the sanctions list?
Not specifically in those terms, but I mean, because it hasn't... Alumina has not been put on the sanctions list, Justin. I mean, I think you need to, the European Commission puts forward a range of issues on the agenda. Every member state engages with the European Commission in respect of potential issues that might affect a given member state. Yeah. We're open. We do not want to, in any shape or form, be supporting the Russian war machine. That said,
and it's possible that we are by exporting that material to make weapons of war.
But again, we will engage with the Commission on this, and when the investigation is complete, when the next number of weeks, we will take that to the Commission, and the Commission has to look at it on a European-wide basis, that it doesn't undermine which is a vital, critical raw material in itself.
Yes, you want to keep making alumina, refining it in that plant. So if
Augusta has two plants in Europe, Augusta, Sweden, and Augusta, Dunkirk as well. So we have to weigh up what would the impact be of any situation in terms of it not.
And have you asked the European Commission then to provide financial support for Aughinish alumina if that were to happen, if exports to Russia were to stop?
Not specifically, we're not at that stage yet. What Europe has said, when the investigation is complete, we'll engage with the Commission. These are issues that could end up in the mix, certainly.
Is nationalising that plant a possibility?
Again, I'm not going to speculate on that at this particular point in time. But you're not ruling it out. Retaining that capacity from a European perspective, smelting capacity, is an important consideration that we'd have to weigh up. The prospects of doing that is another matter altogether. And again, these are issues we will discuss with the Commission.
Do you anticipate that there will be an attempt to compromise Ireland's security over the next 6 months by an outside actor, either through drone disruption, as we saw the last time President Zelensky came to Ireland, or the possibility of a cyber attack or something like that?
Well, I mean, across Europe since the war began in Ukraine, there's been numerous cyber attacks, and they continue apace, both in private sector and public sector utilities across Europe. We have to remain calm about this as well, and firm, and we've taken a lot of precautions, and the Gardaí in particular have, and our defence forces have equipped and so on, and done a lot of scenario planning. But I think we will. We're confident that we can carry out this presidency in an efficient and in an effective and safe manner. And that's our determination, is to do that.
There has been a French naval vessel with advanced radar in Dublin Bay assisting the Irish Defence Forces in advance of the presidency. Have foreign military powers been given the right to engage or shoot down drones that they might detect if there's a hostile threat during this presidency?
No, I mean, the first and important point to make is we cooperate all of the time with European member states in respect of sharing intelligence, cooperation, and understanding what's in the air and what's in the seas, particularly the wider area outside of our territorial waters. The military, the Defence Force, have established their own joint command. And within Irish territory, our military will obviously be in charge of any decisions or any potential scenarios that unfold in terms of any actions or whatever like that.
The French are helping us. Is anybody else helping us? Is anybody else sending military equipment to Ireland during this presidency?
No, not at this stage. No.
All right. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Helen McEntee, told the Irish Examiner that there is momentum now to push for an EU-wide ban on trade with Israeli-occupied territories during the presidency. And we heard earlier from Tony Connolly that there will be likely some resistance from Ursula von der Leyen and from Germany. Do you detect that there is enough appetite now within the EU to push through a ban on trade to the occupied territories?
It remains to be seen. I think from my last meeting, it's not so much the Commission. A QMV could be possible at the Foreign Affairs Council. But there are still some member states, particularly after recent elections, where the attitude will be absolutely quite different towards Slovenia being a very good example, for example. Those are the realities that we face with 27 member states. There has been, as Tony would have said earlier in your bulletin, a noticeable shift in opinion in relation to Israel's behaviour in Gaza, continued denial of sufficiency of humanitarian aid into Gaza, its behaviour on the West Bank, particularly violent settlers in the West Bank, and Lebanon as well.
Do you want to try and get a trade ban then to the occupied territories during the presidency?
At a minimum, we've been pushing for this for the last 2 years, irrespective of whether we had the presidency or not. And we've noticed a significant shift in opinion because people are really quite angry with what is going on in Lebanon and what has been going on in Gaza and in the West Bank. The problem all along has been trying to get unanimity and trying to get a sufficiency of members. Some member states have historic issues in terms of Israel, which has been an obstacle in some respects, or which has prevented them from agreeing with our position or the Spanish position. And that has been a challenge to try and get agreement across 27 member states on this issue. But on the other hand, it has to be said that the European Union remains the single largest global donor to Palestine and to Palestinians, and sometimes that gets completely forgotten, but it is important. And Europe is getting increasingly frustrated, for example, at the refusal of Israel to facilitate a European presence at the Rafah crossing, and to have a European input into making sure that we get aid into Gaza and getting access to Gaza. I mean, the world has been still denied access to Gaza. Humanitarian agencies, the European Union itself, the international media, and that's a very fundamental requirement in my view, that the world needs to see, notwithstanding all the reports we get, need access into Gaza.
Okay, and that's an issue, no doubt, that you will be raising over the next 6 months. We've spoken about security already. Is it still your intention domestically to proceed with abolishing the triple lock, even though 17 members of your own party have signed a letter saying that they're concerned about it?
Well, of those 17, by the way, some favour it actually, but they were anxious for a debate.
They want more discussion.
Yeah, and just make the point that it's nearly 3 years now since I floated this myself and proposed it in the Dáil in November 23. But the real issue facing us is this will concretise around Lebanon when the UNIFIL mandate will come to an end this year, and we won't have theatres where we can send sufficient number of our soldiers and naval personnel to peacekeeping missions. The prospect of that being renewed by the UN is very limited, it would appear at this stage, and that will be a serious issue for us over time.
Are you going then to push ahead with the legislation
before
the end of the year?
The government has approved of the legislation.
And when will it be introduced?
Well, at this stage, given the enormity of the agenda for the next 2 weeks in the Dáil, there's a lot of stuff being legislation has to get through before the summer recess. I think we're looking at the autumn session. The autumn,
even though that there is opposition, there are sceptics within your own party. I mean, for example,
there was a good debate in the parliamentary party, and that issue that I raised in terms of our historic role has been that of peacekeepers. That's not going to change with any amendment to triple lock.
Do you yourself then have the political capital within your own party to push through this legislation, given that there is growing, or at least some opposition to it within your party?
There's very strong support within the parliamentary party behind this measure, and has been for quite some time.
You don't anticipate a problem?
Well, I think there will be debate in that, but where I anticipate the problem is in a post-UNIFIL situation, for example, we've had to pull out of Irene, and this will be a matter for our defence forces as well that will give them concern, because young soldiers, they want experience in peacekeeping missions, and they want to have access to that. If Europe, for example, decides to have a CSDP mission after UNIFIL ends, we cannot participate in that at the moment. It could be the training of Lebanese soldiers, it could be monitoring the situation in South Lebanon. We simply won't be able to be there, and that's a serious issue for us that we have to weigh up in this debate.
Can I turn now to matters in your own county and mine? We heard on this programme last week harrowing interviews with women from Dundero National School near Kinsale who were abused as children by their teacher Leo Hickey. They were very disturbing, very distressing interviews, and these were women who said that they had been forced now to go to court or take expensive legal proceedings before they can access redress, for which there is a precedent because Louise O'Keefe, their classmate, won a landmark case to get redress. You have the political power to make things right for those women. Are you going to do that? Will you get them the redress so that they can live out the rest of their lives with some dignity?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, the abuse carried out by Leo Hickey was absolutely horrific, and enormous trauma was imposed on those women and indeed their classmates in that school. There have been other abuses in other schools also, and that's why we have set up a comprehensive commission of investigation into abuse in our schools more generally, and why there's an interdepartmental group formed to look at the question of how could redress more generally across
but
the system.
specifically for these women.
I'll come to that, how more generally it could be applied. And in particular, as per the scoping inquiry into that, how religious orders and those responsible for running schools could be held accountable and could contribute and actually pay for that redress. Now, in respect of Dundera, the Attorney General has recommended that we go to mediation. There has been a long journey in respect of this issue of the ex gratia payment scheme that was established post the European Court of Human Rights case, and about 128 people have availed of that ex gratia payment, but others haven't been able to because of the parameters governing that. So what is happening right now, there's been a number of cases in respect of different schools that are endeavouring to get access to the ex gratia payment scheme. We have discussed this, and the Attorney General now will engage with the legal representatives and get this into mediation. We do not want these women to go through the courts.
You don't,
and accept that point.
And so, do you accept then what Professor Conor O'Mahony of UCC, the former Special Rapporteur for Child Protection, said, that there's no legal reason why that those women should have to wait for compensation. There's no reason why they should have to go to court. The only thing stopping them getting the redress that they should be getting is the political will.
I don't think that's as simple as put, because there are broader issues that have to be taken into consideration as well, the ones I've just referenced, because it's not just one school.
But these were classmates of Louise O'Keeffe.
Sorry, I'm not arguing with that, but I'm just making the point that it's a bit broader than Conor has suggested, and has wider implications. But that said, in my view, we do not want these women to have to go through the court system, and certainly I wouldn't be at all comfortable. Absolutely not in defending any position in the courts and bringing those women in particular through the courts.
Do you anticipate then that a mediation will resolve the issue for these women?
That would be my anticipation.
Okay. You'll be aware that people's energy bills are going up again. Electric Ireland customers will pay more from this week. Other companies are also upping their prices. There are hundreds of thousands of customers in arrears. Yesterday, the government announced plans to increase the cost of fuel again from September. Are you still, from the fuel tax cuts, are you still ruling out energy credits now to help people through what's going to be a difficult winter?
Two things there. The government isn't increasing the price. The government reduced by 32 cents on diesel.
It's going back up in September.
Well, come on now, let's get accurate. 32 cents on diesel and 27 on petrol. Yeah. We reduced it, okay? The cost of that now out to December will be 1 billion. Okay. So we're not adding, it's a bit, we have to be very accurate about this. This is taxpayers' money that we subsidise.
On energy credits.
No, just come back a second now. The war is over, please God, and it'll stay over. And there's an agreement in terms of freeing up the Strait of Hormuz. That should bring the prices down in commodity markets and has to feed into the prices in terms of what people pay in this country. And already there has been a reduction from the highs, but we need it to come down even more. That's why we've graduated then the restoration of this and the removal of the subsidy that the government had to bring in this year to try and alleviate the pressures on people. In terms of the budgetary proposals, we want to target our supports to people to reduce pressures on families and on children. So like we did in the last budget, very substantial targeting happened actually in the last budget. That actually has an impact on low-income families.
Universal energy credits, are they not?
They would be very difficult, but I think we're looking at tax measures. For example, we want to help workers with tax measures. We want to look at areas in terms of working family payment and other areas like the fuel allowance and so on like that, where on a more broad basis, and childcare, for example. I mean,
we'll maybe come back to you on the budget.
It's an important, I know, but it's an important point. Like, what's the most effective way of reducing pressure on families? I think if we're going to reduce childcare costs, for example, that would be a far more enduring, long-term way of helping families than a temporary, universal energy payment that will also help those who are very well off. All right,
we're way over time, but I do want to ask you one final question. When the EU presidency is over, there are lots of people who are saying that would be a good time for you, and you've had a long tenure as leader of your party, to consider your future. Will you be doing that?
No, I mean, look, my focus is on the European presidency, Justin. I have a mandate. I was elected only 16 months ago. That's all this government is in office, by the way, 16 months. I've been elected as Taoiseach by the Dáil, and I will be seeing out that mandate and doing everything I can to help people with housing, with those with disabilities, with the infrastructure needs of this country. And yesterday we had a further chapter in terms of the housing issue with the,
the
guidelines in terms of
time for
you asked the question in terms of rural housing guidelines and so on. So I'm just telling you where my focus is. It's on people's needs and not on the political speculation and gossip that keeps all you guys going.
It does indeed. But Taoiseach, we do appreciate you coming in to talk to us this morning. And it's a very busy day and a very busy 6 months ahead for you. So we appreciate you,
Thank you very much,
coming in to
Justin.
speak with us.
Thank you.
Taoiseach Michéal Martin there.